Alright, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to another video here on the channel, and today we are going to be talking about a little bit of breaking news that just broke a few minutes before I started recording this video, but it's something that people have been looking forward to for not even just months at this point. It's been literally years that this whole Epstein controversy and the fallout of everything that happened surrounding Jeffrey Epstein's name has been in the news, right? Now, obviously over the last few months, it's kind of heated up even more and even reached a boiling point. We had moments like where people online definitively proved that the footage that was released from Epstein's cell that apparently proved that there was no weird wrongdoing regarding his death in prison, right? People basically proved that the footage was spliced and edited in an Adobe product before being published to the public at large, honestly. I mean, pretty insane that they thought they'd get away with that, but I digress. We did get some news today, and that is that the United States House of Representatives has nearly unanimously voted to unseal all of the Epstein files. This is something people have been looking forward to for a while. Obviously, throughout the majority of President Trump's second term in office, this has been a almost like Achilles heel kind of issue for him, right? Where it seems like no matter what else politically is going on, you know, all the tariff drama, all of the meetings with other countries' leaders and everything that's been going on, President Trump has basically been trying to battle for his name with this whole Epstein thing. There have been plenty of accusations, and just a few days ago, there was another like 20,000 emails from Jeffrey Epstein that were released by the Democrats that purportedly show that the president was a pretty good friend of Epstein, and like I said, you know, he's been kind of battling this issue throughout the entirety of this presidential term so far. Earlier this year, you know, he was talking about like anyone who was MAGA before who's like focused on this is not MAGA now. He's called it a hoax, he's deflected from it, said, you know, that people are basically buying into a bunch of nothing. So today, the U.S. House of Representatives voted to fully unseal the entirety of the Epstein files, which, I mean, honestly is probably going to be thousands upon thousands of pages. But the vote just took place. Like I said, it was nearly unanimous. In fact, there was only one representative in the entire vote that actually voted no on unsealing the Epstein files. So we're going to go ahead and get into this and take a look. After months of anticipation, the House of Representatives on Tuesday overwhelmingly passed a bill ordering the release of the Justice Department's files on the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. It passed 427-1, with GOP Representative Clay Higgins as the only vote against the measure. The bill will now head to the Senate, where its fate is uncertain. About a dozen Epstein victims, including Virginia Giuffre, I believe is how you say that's brother, were seated in the front row of the gallery as the vote got underway. Some left the chamber after the tally grew above a supermajority, and passage was not in peril. Earlier on Tuesday, a group of women victimized by Epstein spoke outside the Capitol and urged lawmakers to vote yes on the bill. Several took aim at President Donald Trump directly and criticized his handling of the matter. House Speaker Mike Johnson had tried to avoid holding a vote in the lower chamber on the Epstein matter. In late July, Johnson sent the House home a day early for August recess because the House was paralyzed in a stalemate over the Epstein issue. Alright, so obviously this is a pretty major development in the entire story because for years up until now, pretty much at like every level of the federal government, anyone who was like even remotely close to, related to, affiliated with Jeffrey Epstein in any way, there's been this complete like dark silence over the entire issue, and the only things that have really slipped through the cracks have been these massively sanitized pieces that are, it seems like almost intentionally put out there in order to like mentally manipulate the public. For instance, when Jeffrey Epstein died in his jail cell, for most people, it comes to mind like, okay, this is pretty shady. All of the details and circumstances around it don't really make sense. The official explanations that he killed himself, they don't make any sense. A few months ago, they released what is supposed to be the official footage of his jail cell, which was later discovered by people online by simply looking at the video's metadata. The video had been spliced and edited inside of an Adobe video editing product. It clearly wasn't the unedited, undoctored footage like all these people were claiming that it was. So like everything that we've gotten up until this point, it seems like obviously there was never going to be any answers to the question. And in terms of actually getting some results out of this entire thing, this is probably the biggest step so far. But I personally am still extremely skeptical, and I'm going to explain why in this video, but I also want to point out before I even go any further, the fact that only one person voted no on on this, right? Which is Representative Clay Higgins. It's like, why would you vote against this? I mean, for most of us, the only reason that can even remotely come to mind as to why you'd be like, yeah, don't release the Epstein files. Nobody needs to know anything about what's going on there. Yeah, that convicted sex predator who was like trafficking people to his island and was friends with all these big businessmen and all these entertainers and politicians and whatnot. Yeah, don't look into that. We don't want to know about that. The only reason anyone can see for why you would want this to not be released or found out about is if you have some skeletons in the closet that you don't want exposed. Now, am I outright accusing Representative Higgins of being in the files or whatever? Not necessarily, but like I said, rationally, what defense do you have for being like, nah, we don't need to know about this, cover that up a little bit more? I don't really know. But obviously, that's been kind of the mindset that like all of the government has had for years at this point. I mean, it's been basically behind closed doors for like the entirety of my adult life, probably. I mean, it's pretty apparent that some pretty horrible shit went down revolving around Jeffrey Epstein and his client list and the island and everything. And people have just been wanting answers. Now, apparently the answers will be coming, but like I said, I'm very skeptical. Now, it would be very, I guess, misleading of me to not mention that just because this measure passed in the House of Representatives, that does not mean that it's going to pass outright. Now, if you're not from the United States, or if you're here in the United States and you don't really understand how your own federal government works, which you probably should, when bills like this get voted on, right, there's Congress, which is separated into two different sections. You have the House of Representatives, and then you have the Senate, okay? Now, the House of Representatives, that's who voted on this measure today. Like I said, it passed 427-1, so it will be advancing out of the House. Now it will go to the Senate, which will vote on it again. Now, if it gets passed by the Senate, the bill is then sent to the president, who will either sign off on it or he'll veto it. If it gets vetoed, it goes back down. Congress has to vote on it again. If it's voted through by both sides of Congress after the president vetoes, the, bill basically passes because that's the checks and balances of the federal government at work right there, right? Now, obviously, Trump, throughout the majority of this timeline so far, has been pretty staunchly opposed to the whole Epstein bill thing, to it being released or like any info coming out. He's pretty much outright called it like a hoax and said that people are focusing on the wrong things. And even with it passing in the House of Representatives, there are still a lot of lawmakers that have been very critical of the bill. In fact, the article goes on to, I guess, further describe this. So, Johnson continued to criticize the bill, that is, the Speaker of the House, his name is Mike Johnson, continued to criticize the bill on Tuesday morning, but confirmed he would be voting to move it forward. Just before the votes were cast, Johnson said on the House floor that it was a, quote, political exercise and that the bill has, quote, serious deficiencies. Johnson said he hoped the Senate would make changes to it. Quote, Trump has nothing to hide, Johnson said. The president had also mounted opposition to the measure, including what sources said was an attempt to dissuade GOP Representative Lauren Boebert in the White House Situation Room from supporting the discharge petition to force a floor vote. But faced with growing support for the measure in the GOP-controlled House, Trump suddenly reversed course over the weekend and said Republicans should vote yes on releasing the files, quote, because we have nothing to hide. Pressed if he will sign the bill should it reach his desk, Trump on Monday said he would. Quote, I'm all for it, Trump said. The measure, called the Epstein Files Transparency Act, would compel Attorney General Pam Bondi to make available all, quote, unclassified records, documents, communications, and investigative materials in the Department of Justice's possession related to Epstein. So this is kind of where my skepticism for this entire thing starts to play out. Now, I genuinely hope that I'm wrong, right? I hope that what I'm about to describe doesn't happen, because I'm assuming most of you watching this video, I've been wanting this to happen for years. I've been wanting for this whole Epstein stuff to finally be known. That way, not that we can just move past it as a country and as, I guess, a world, because I'm sure this was an international thing, but just so the truth can finally be out there and people don't have to sit here and cast doubt and then pull doubt away, all these changing elements of everything, right? But with the way that everything works in the government, and with the fact that Trump up until recently opposed this, and the very specific wording at the end of that paragraph I just read you, these are the things that make me skeptical. And then also you look at the history of these other declassifications and all these other, JFK files, this is what happened on 9/11, all these different things, right? It all kind of makes me so skeptical that I almost don't believe anything will really happen, even though we're seeing these votes overwhelmingly in favor of it. So, number one, like I said, there is still a chance that, let's say, it fails in the Senate, or even if it does get to Trump's desk, even though he publicly stated, I'm gonna sign it, there is still a chance that he decides not to. Now, in that event that he does that, I assume that it would only be like a political suicide, essentially, for the Republican Party, because the midterm elections are coming up next year in 2026. The Republicans are already very concerned with some of the results that happened this year in like government elections in like Virginia and in other states where like governors and stuff were up for re-election, representative spots were up for re-election, redistricting in California, all these other things going on, right? So there's already some legitimate political threat coming based on everything going on right now, you know? So going into the midterms, the Republicans have to do something to try and keep their, I guess, majorities and to keep the country, I guess, in favor of what they're doing so that they can continue to exercise their political stature that they have right now. Now, obviously, the general public overwhelmingly wants to know what the fuck was going on with this whole Epstein thing. It's not even really up for debate at this point. Pretty much everybody you talk to is going to be like, yeah, I want to know what happened. So if it does come out somehow that, you know, the Senate or Trump decides to try and shut this down, it's going to, I believe, cause yet another big mistake, I guess an avoidable mistake really, that could genuinely threaten the Republicans politically over the next 2 or so election cycles. So if Trump knows what's best for him and the Republican Party throughout the rest of his presidency, he's gonna vote for this to be declassified. But like I said, you gotta look at the wording of this, right? At that last paragraph, you know, it says it would make all, quote, unclassified, keyword, unclassified records, documents, communications, and investigative materials. Now, if you've ever like looked through any of these declassifications and stuff like that go on with the government where they act like they're actually giving people information, 9 times out of 10, they'll be like, all right, we're declassifying this. And it'll be 900 pages of info. And you're like, oh shit, they finally did something. But then 895 of the 900 pages are completely blacked out and you can't see any actual real revealing information on what's going on. And I'm genuinely concerned that that is what's going to happen here, as it did with the JFK files, as it has with anything that's ever been declassified about anything that's ever had anything to do negatively with any member of the US federal government. There is an established pattern through the US government that when they declassify things, they're not going to declassify things that will genuinely harm public belief or public trust in the federal government. They're not going to willingly undermine themselves. I mean, they do in other ways, but they're not going to do it just so broadly and openly as to tell you like, oh, hey, yeah, this is what really happened. All that bullshit we've been propping up for 30, 40 years now. Yeah, it was all just a bunch of brainwashing hoopla. They're not going to do that. And as we all are pretty well aware, there were definitely some US government officials, including allegedly Donald Trump, the president of the United States, who had pretty complicated relationships with Jeffrey Epstein, who, with all of the evidence that's been made available, appear to have been or knew about some of that awful shit that Epstein was doing. And so, does it really make sense that the US government, right, is just going to be like, okay, like, let's say hypothetically, you know, Trump was on the island or whatever, right, and he was doing some wild shit. Do you really think that the government's just going to come out and tell you, like, yeah, you know, the president of the United States, he was definitely on that island with trafficked children, with a bunch of sex pests and predators? Why would they tell you that? Why would they allow you to believe that when they can simply say, oh, we're all about it, right? We're all about the transparency. Meanwhile, the vote is still in, you know, Congress. It's still waiting to actually be fully approved. They still have time to be redacting the files. They still have the time to be cleaning up the files. And that's what I'm truly worried is what's going to happen. You know, maybe they do release fucking 50,000 pages. Oh, we released the full Epstein files. But if only 3 of them hold any meaningful information, or if out of the 50,000 of them, 35,000 are redacted, right? Like, what are we really fighting for here? And that's the problem. Is I just throughout my lifetime have constantly been disappointed by the government when it comes to anything, and most especially when it comes to telling people the truth and being open about the things that it's doing. So I'm honestly not convinced that they're gonna miraculously change course overnight and just decide, hey, you know, maybe the US president, maybe some former presidents, some high-ranking members of Congress and secretaries from back in the day, military generals, yada, 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 the whole 9 yards, right? Maybe maybe they were all pedophiles. Maybe they were all trafficking human beings. Maybe they all were cutting backseat deals with Epstein and whatnot. Maybe they were a little too close to Bubba back in the day, right? But why would they tell you that when they have no vested interest in it? And that's honestly why Trump and all these other politicians up until like 2 weeks ago, when everybody decided that they're all in favor of voting this through, they were all trying to, muddy the water. They were all trying to, no, well, we don't have to vote on it right now. We could just take a recess. I mean, we're gridlocked on the issue, right? Like, I'm just not ready to fall for it yet. You know what I mean? I'm not ready to drink the Kool-Aid. Do I hope that the Kool-Aid isn't poisoned? Absolutely. Do I hope that they're actually, for once, doing the right thing? Absolutely. Do I believe them when they say that they are? Not until I see it, okay? That's my 2 cents. Now, I'm not trying to downplay this necessarily as like not important, because the fact that there's been such a reversal openly shows that the public pressure has meant at least something, right? Because everybody on the Republican side is aware that their political futures are definitely somewhere in the gray zone right now, where it's like, well, this is obviously a big issue. It's not going away. It's probably now one of the top political issues that every American is thinking about. We're not just going to tell people, oh, what you think is fake, don't worry about it, guys. No big deal here. They're not going to be able to cover it up with the rug anymore. And so I think that they all finally realize, okay, well, we have to do something, but that something can mean anything. You know what I mean? That something can be moving it just a little bit, or it could be actually revealing all of it and just dropping all the bombshells. Do I hope the bombshells are what we actually see and something useful comes out of this? Yes. But once again, I'm not totally convinced quite yet. Now, this is a positive step, granted, but I really want to see him walk the full walk before I'm too excited about anything. And I think as the public of America, and realistically the world, because like I said, I think this is definitely a pretty globalized issue at this point, we need to keep the pressure up. We can't just be celebrating the victory too early, like, oh, they're finally voting on it. Well, yeah, let's make them vote on it and then vote on it again, and then make them release the real things. And if they aren't releasing the real files, let them know that you're going to replace them with your votes, or blow up their phone lines in their offices or whatever. Send them as many emails as you can till the fucking server shuts down, right? Because that's the only thing that they actually listen to. The political capital of America, the only thing it cares about is generating votes in its favor. It doesn't care about anything else. If it cared about justice, if it cared about accountability, any of these things before, the history of the United States would be vastly different. That's all I'm saying. But anyway, it's good to be back, man. I haven't made a video in about 3 months, which is actually the longest break I've taken in almost a decade. I think the last time that I was away from uploading this long was late 2016, so it's been a minute, but glad to be back. This is obviously a pretty insane topic to come back to, but to a degree, it feels like I never really left off, because this is kind of like some of the stuff I was covering before I left. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're brand new around here on the channel, follow me over on Twitter and Twitch at @SubTheOptimus. Make sure to check out Shoptimus down below. Thank you to my Watch Optimus subscribers. Your support helps the channel tremendously. And until my next video, guys, this is Optimus, well, talking about the House voting yes on releasing the Epstein files, and signing out.